Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, May 18th, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jon Marshall, associate professor at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University, author of Clash, Presidents and the Press in Times of Crisis. Then, Alex Speidel, organizer for the United Paizo Workers. Did I say that right? Paizo Workers. Also on the program tonight, Mansion Cinema wing of the Democratic Party takes a bit of a pounding last night.
Woohoo!
Progressives also grabbed some wins. Meanwhile, Sean Patrick Maloney slammed by his Democratic colleagues for bigfooting freshman Congressman Mondaire Jones. House Democrats introduced a $28 million baby formula bill. Ukraine peace talks have ground to a halt. Governor DeSantis signs a bill to outlaw protests in front of private homes.
Free speech warrior.
U.S. gun, and also a man of the people.
That too.
You know how those protests that take place out in front of like middle-class homes and low-income homes? U.S. gun production tripled since the year 2000. Tripled. DOJ wants interview transcripts from the January 6th committee. Prosecutors file more information on the prosecution of Trump pal Thomas Barrack, Daddy Warbucks, and Elon Musk trying to back out of his Twitter deal at the speed of a Hyperloop. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is that magic day where all of Emma Vigeland's work in coining a phrase, which has really stuck, I have to say.
Yeah.
You want to, this is a trademark phrase. I hope folks, when we encourage people to use it, but really they should be sending you royalties. Well, you have to pay me.
Yeah, right, obviously.
Yep.
My check seemed to have gotten lost in the mail, viewership. It's hump day.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
And also, before you send emails, I get that the Hyperloop doesn't actually move. It's the cars in the Hyperloop that move. All right? So I don't need any...
theoretically.
Yes, Elon Musk.
Well, they move one way. The rest of the cars have to wait. Then they can go back because the genius was not smart enough to build 2 lanes. Right? That's what it is.
But if you did that, then it would just be a tunnel.
Exactly.
Apparently, he did not do his due diligence in asking Twitter when he signed his letter of intent. Like, hey, anything I should know about spam bots or anything like that? I feel like we just had a debate with that dude that came on who's now like all pro Putin. I feel like he accounts for probably a huge percentage of those spam bots. Just him alone.
Maybe.
It would be pretty funny if that's what crashed the Twitter deal. Anyways, it's nice to see that guy, his bluff being called. And
Yeah.
I
was convinced
I hope the
he
deal
was-
goes through. I really still do. I want Elon Musk to own Twitter as much as possible. I think it would be great.
I would just love to see how it plays out after like they Dave Rubin types realize they can't work the refs anymore without going against Daddy Elon.
Right. Well, you can't
Perfect.
pretend like you need to
Exactly.
work the refs.
Well, they catch the car.
I'm still being
as Sam would
shadow
say.
banned. What's going on? I'm still being
There
shadow
must be a
banned.
mistake, sir.
Hi. What? I put out one of my best tweets yesterday, and no one retweeted it. I must be shadow banned. Pretty good night last night, folks.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but you know, the best baseball hitter in history only hit 400. So decent numbers last night. But what was also really good was, you know, we'd spoken to Dave Weigel at the beginning of our coverage last night, and on this story of the nearly double the amount of money that poured into Democratic primaries in 2022 versus 2020. Nearly double. And a lot of that money was from Republican donors through these PACs that, you know, sort of like generated out of AIPAC. Republican donors and centrist Democratic donors and millionaires and crypto millionaires and a lot of them lost.
Which is so sweet. One, like, the amount of money that's pouring in indicates that they view these candidates as threats, and they also view a consolidated progressive wing that's more than just, you know, whatever, 8, 10 squad members, but increasing in numbers. They're fearful of that 100%. And then the cherry on top, or really, you know, the best news of the evening, is that in most cases it did not succeed.
And the value of that is not just in these specific races, but also in the fact that it's going to be harder for those campaign operatives to go back to these billionaires and say, oh, look, this is tried and tested.
Here's the return on your investment.
And so that, you know, they'll be less inclined to do this maybe in the future. In terms of like our scorecard last night, Charles Booker won. It looks like Jamie McLeod Skinner in Oregon won, beating out an incumbent guy who was basically slammed for being a Joe Manchin, wouldn't vote for the Build Back Better bill.
He cut the prescription drug pricing part of the bill so thoroughly in the House, and then Manchin and Sinema, you know, kind of eliminated altogether in the Senate.
Yeah, right. Kurt Schrader took $1 million, I think, from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes.
And
he also reportedly called the impeachment of Trump during debates about it a, quote, lynching. So he's that kind of Democrat.
Yeah, besides Cuellar, he was, like, I think the worst House Democrat
100%.
left. Like,
and he was endorsed sort of rather publicly by Joe Biden. Connor Lamb also obviously got beat by shellacked by Fetterman.
And then Biden endorsed Fetterman after that. So there's whatever.
Well, it's fine.
Yeah.
Steve Irwin also lost, who was one of these like corporate Dems who got, I think it was over $1 million were poured into his campaign from those like AIPAC derivative PACs. And he lost. And he lost to Summer Lee. And here's the campaign speech he gave, or I should say the acceptance speech last night.
gratitude to you all. We got a lot of work to do.
There was also some pickups in the state Senate in Pennsylvania. We'll go through these more, but overall, pretty good. And you can watch, if you are interested in more information about Summer Lee, you can watch the interview that Emma did with her on from March 24th of this year.
Yeah. She was excellent. I mean, I think I remarked to Bradley and Matt after the interview, I've had a handful of interviews with politicians where you're wowed by them. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was one. Jamal Bowman was another. Summer Lee was one for me as well. And so I am incredibly excited about this victory. One, for what it signals and what you laid out well, Sam. But two, just the twin victories of Fetterman and Summer Lee in Pennsylvania. That's the coalition that you want. And you said this a bit last night. I mean, one, they both were heavily supportive of the labor movement, things like the PRO Act. Unions, being pro-union, was front-facing in their politics. Summer Lee has a background, I believe, either endorsed by DSA or was a part of DSA. So just really encouraging signs all across the board in terms of Pennsylvania in general.
And here is, of all people, Chris Wallace on CNN now recapping the night for progressives.
I will say I have to disagree slightly with the previous panel, because while his authenticity and down-to-earthness, if there's such a phrase, played very well in the Democratic primary, you get to a general election, particularly if you end up with a moderate like Dave McCormick, there are a lot of things that the Republicans are going to have to work with in going after John Fetterman. This is a guy who is against limits on abortion. He's for universal background checks. He wants to end the filibuster. He wants to legalize pot.
What? So unpopular to legalize pot. Gosh, that is what a liability. I would love the Republican candidate to run on "I will never ever legalize pot in this state." It is just. Chris Wallace maybe might need to spend some time with the kids a little bit. Like, and by kids, I mean anyone under the age of, like, I don't know.
Well, he says Fetterman's down to earth, probably because he just he would understand that, right? He gets what the kids are all about.
What do they say? Down to earth authenticity. What do these words mean? I have no idea. I'm Chris Wallace. I've been in the news studio for 40 years.
Yeah, it really exactly. And of all places, too, Fox, where it was just like the fact that I wasn't bat crap crazy was enough for me to establish an entire career. But I think Fetterman's a very strong candidate, and we'll talk more about that as the weeks go on and the program proceeds. But in a moment, we're going to be talking to Jon Marshall, associate professor at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University, author of Clash, Presidents, the Press, Times of Crisis, and Alex Speidel, organizer for the United Paizo Workers. Paizo, right. Speaking of ISO, no, that's not going to rhyme. I've mentioned this many times before. We have a real deficit of memory in this country. Gore Vidal had that. It was on the program, 18 years ago, and was talking about the United States of amnesia. And it is a real problem, particularly when we live in an age where it is so easy to reframe and forget even recent history. I give you just the reformation of George W. Bush. But that's why I'm highly recommending you check out Fiasco. It is a new Audible original podcast, documentary-style podcast series. It's hosted by Leon Nafak. He is the co-creator and original host of Slow Burn. You're going to love Fiasco if you loved those stories about Watergate and the Clinton impeachment. Each season of Fiasco goes deep on a huge, important story from American history, and they speak to witnesses and people who are real-time and key players. They do a lot of great reporting. The newest season of Fiasco is all about the AIDS crisis. They try and re-examine and reckon with the last time a deadly virus transformed American society, looking at all those people, particularly, what we did on a political end. And in many cases, my daughter, even the other, like, how was Reagan during the AIDS crisis? And I'm like, well, about as bad as you could imagine. But this is why it's so important to check this out. You can listen to the new season of Fiasco exclusively on Audible. Just go to audible.com/fiascopod. That's audible.com/fiascopod, or text fiascopod to 500-500. Okay, I want to welcome to the program Jon Marshall, associate professor at the Medill. I'm not sure I'm saying that pronouncing that correctly. Right. School of Journalism at Northwestern University, is author of Clash: Presidents and the Press in a Times of Crisis. Jon, welcome to the show. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Hello, Sam, and hello, Emma. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
100%.
So I want to start because you basically hit some the book is a sort of a history of, not sort of, but a history of the relationship between the press and the presidency, but particularly sort of, I guess, watershed relationships over the course of American history that brought us to where we are today with this relationship. So let's, sort of reverse engineer this. Where are we today in terms of this dynamic between the presidency and the press?
Oh, I think we are in troubled times in terms of that dynamic, but it's not the first time we've been in troubled times in terms of that dynamic. And I'm sure your listeners are well aware of a lot of the problems that we face today in terms of how the media covers the presidency and how presidents in recent years, particularly Donald Trump, have attacked journalists. But it's not the first time. And my book starts with John Adams in the 1790s and his attack on newspaper writers and editors of the day with the Sedition Act, when more than 100 people were prosecuted for daring to say or write something that was critical of the government or critical of the press. And the Federalists in power, including John Adams, and they controlled Congress and they controlled the courts, went after anybody who was critical of the president and the government, and it ended up as a result shutting down newspapers and curbing free speech and a free press. But in the end, it came back to bite John Adams because he lost the election to Thomas Jefferson, and one of the reasons was because of the popular distaste for his Sedition Act.
All right. Well, then let's let's jump to one of the next big moments that develops this is Abraham Lincoln. And that's a big jump. Why does it? Where is the lineage between what happens with Adams and with Lincoln, or how do we see this in the context of the development of a relationship?
Right. So I decided I wasn't going to try to cover every president because that could be an extremely long book. So I picked 10 of them whose presidencies I think really reflected some key moments in terms of that dynamic. And sort of the through line between John Adams, we just talked about, tried to suppress the press. Lincoln, in probably the time of our nation's greatest crisis, the Civil War, the Union military, as well as the Confederacy, did try to restrict the press as well and limit their coverage of what was going on in the war. But what I really focus on in the Lincoln chapter is the power of the press to influence a president. Lincoln wasn't an abolitionist to start with. He was anti-slavery, but he wasn't in favor of abolishing slavery where it already existed. But through the abolitionist press, which started as a very small segment of the press at that time and was considered a fringe radical group for much of the early 1800s, gradually grew more influence, grew more readers. Lincoln's law partner, William Herndon, subscribed to abolitionist newspapers, would read them to him. And once Lincoln became president, he actually invited abolitionist editors and leaders such as Frederick Douglass, William Lloyd Garrison, to talk with him in the White House. And through their pressure, their influence in the Republican Party, he needed them to win re-election in 1864. Lincoln's moral compass of being opposed to slavery began to gradually align with his political and his strategic compass of wanting to win the war and win re-election. And the abolitionist press was part of the reason he did that. Through their pressure, through talking to him, they got him to support the Emancipation Proclamation and then to support the 13th Amendment.
What's the calculus that is used when a president is pushed by the press? I mean, I think like on some level, from my perspective, we have that problem. This also applies to really to the leadership of the parties, and we see. I don't know if you can see Republicans responding to, let's say, like Fox News as much as working in tandem, right? I mean, it doesn't even seem to be necessarily enough daylight between them, but certainly you see like the Democratic leadership respond to what seems to be an increasingly insignificant circle of media, the Sunday talk shows and maybe a couple of other shows. But where does when the abolitionist press comes and tries to convince Lincoln that he should be more aggressive in rolling back slavery, what's the leverage? Is it that he's worried that he thinks they represent a perspective, or he thinks that they will undercut his support amongst their readers?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think the answer is yes to both. Lincoln and smart politicians in other eras understand that the press, however it exists in their era, then it was mostly newspapers, some magazines in Lincoln's day, a few pamphlets. Now, obviously, it's everything from social media to television to radio to print and everything else that's online, podcasts like yours. So a smart politician, especially a president, is going to understand that that media can influence their listeners, their audience, to support or support them in their policies or go against them and their policies. And you mentioned Fox News a few moments ago in connection with the Republican Party. And I talk quite a bit about that in my book, how the Republican Party really began to merge with right-wing media starting really during the George W. Bush administration, and almost really became one and the same in some respects. We know about the revolving door between the Trump administration and Fox News. We know that when right-wing talk radio hosts went after a bipartisan immigration effort during the Bush administration, and then later the Obama administration, and got their listeners to oppose it, that then the Republican politicians who are afraid of being called rhinos, Republicans in name only, backed off. So that gets to your question that smart politicians like Lincoln can recognize the power of the media to influence the electorate, influence people who might be their supporters, influence people who might come out against them.
So it's almost like maybe not so veiled threat in some instances, right? I mean, it's much easier to see it for me, on the right than with Republicans than Democrats, like contemporaneously, because there isn't the same media infrastructure on the center to center left. And it's just not as, and in some ways they act as like a buffer. They're far less representative, it seems to me, of the Democratic voter than Fox is and talk radio is of the Republican voter. But let's come to that in a bit, because I want to jump to from the 1860s when Lincoln made that shift to the 1917 with Woodrow Wilson. They used or the administration used I guess fairly recent legislation as a way of prosecuting journalists. This is in the context of World War I. Give us a sense of like why Woodrow Wilson?
Wilson came into office as a great proponent that presidents should work with the press to further the interest of the nation. But Wilson did not have the personality to do that successfully. He'd been president of Princeton and a longtime professor, and he tended to lecture the press as if they were dim-witted students rather than people serving an important role in a democracy. He was first to hold press conferences, but they went terribly because of his sort of stern approach to journalists, and he wanted them to be more stenographers. And anytime they asked a challenging question, he would bristle and shut it down. So he had a very tense relationship with journalists to begin with. Then when World War I started, the United States entered World War I, I should say, he was very much in favor of cracking down on any kind of dissent, whether it was in the press or free speech. And he and his congressional allies passed and signed three really draconian laws. One was the Trading with the Enemies Act, one was the Espionage Act, and the third was another version of the Sedition Act, going back to what John Adams did. And they were so severe that there was a gentleman in Washington who wrote a book saying war is wrong. He was prosecuted and put into jail. There was a Reverend Clarence Waldron wrote that Christians should not fight. He was arrested and put in jail. The Masses, which was a sort of liberal progressive newspaper of its day, had some critical cartoons and articles about the war effort. Their cartoonist and several of their journalists were prosecuted. The whole publication had to shut down as a result. And there's a real climate of fear. There were vigilantes going around cities and towns across the United States looking for people who might oppose the war effort, might oppose the draft, and cracking down on them. There was a socialist newspaper in Milwaukee, The Leader, that was actually published by a congressman. He was a socialist who had been elected to Congress, Victor Berger, and the Postal Service basically shut it down. And Victor Berger was arrested for violating the Espionage Act because he thought that the corporations were profiting too much from war, and he wrote about that. So he went to jail and was finally released on a technicality. So it was a real period of suppression, and it shows the danger of a president who has too much power. And it's really during times of war that we often see that, although during Trump's administration, we certainly saw a president who tried to do the same thing.
What was the how was there a rollback from that? I mean, was it just at the end of the war? Did those and I feel like even under the Obama administration, we saw some of the return of the Espionage Act deployed against the press in this country.
Yeah, Obama. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, but that was, at the time as this was happening, I remember we were saying, like, this hasn't been used in 100 years, and it was Wilson who had used it. How did the ramp down happen? How do you unwind that?
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. Obama dusted off the Espionage Act from 1917, and he used it more often against, or his administration, I should say, used it more often against leakers than all other presidents combined before him. So how did it roll back? You're right. It was largely the end of the war. No longer that great climate of fear that the United States was in this life and death struggle for democracy, although we could question whether it was really for democracy. And it was also partly because Wilson went so far with it and had bred so much mistrust with the press that when he wanted to get the Senate to pass the League of Nations, Wilson spent a number of months in Paris negotiating with the French and the British over the terms of the German surrender and what the peace would look like afterwards. But he really shut off the press from what those discussions entailed. And the reporters who were there, and there were many reporters covering it, it was a big story of the day, but the reporters who were there were shut out from what Wilson was thinking, what his administration was trying to do in terms of forming Wilson's great dream, which was the League of Nations. So in the void of information from Wilson, the Republicans who opposed Wilson were quite willing to fill that void with their arguments against the League of Nations, and by the time Wilson returned to the United States, public opinion had already mounted against the League of Nations, against Wilson's big grand vision, and he was never able to get it through the Senate, and partly due to his own fault in not really using the press to promote his ideas.
I have a little theory about that. That is that he had that flu, and he was losing his mind. But I don't know if that was. I mean, there's some people who have.
Yeah, there's a debate among historians. Did he have the Spanish flu, which might have done that? Others say he just had some strokes and that he had deteriorated. But Wilson's disdain for the press was long before that as well. Right. So it was only intensifying a habit he already had.
Let's skip to Trump, because I want to get a sense of, like, where we are at today. I mean, you started this talk by saying we were in trouble, but like, what does that really mean? And what are the things that are sort of, I mean, I think, the dusting off the Espionage Act on, journalists who are getting leaked information, which I think at the time, but certainly in hindsight, could not be construed as espionage. I mean, I don't think it should have been at the time, but it's also sort of like these leaks were not so damaging that you could even argue, never mind the dynamic of espionage, you can't even argue the implications of espionage, right? There's no damages here, as far as
it's sort of espionage as we tend to think of it, as like you're giving the information to the enemy.
I mean, there has to be some, and that the information is like would be problematic if given to the enemy, and exactly. None of that seems to have been the case. But let's talk about like that relationship with Trump. But I'm also curious from the end of from the side of the press side, like it's a radically different press today than, say, 20 years ago, because of technology and both social media and the what's happened to the news business.
Oh, it's definitely true. So now any of us can really be our own publisher, our own podcaster, or social media influencer. So rather than the president dealing with a few dozen journalists in the White House press corps who might be covering them, now there's literally probably tens of thousands of people who are writing or broadcasting things on a daily basis about the president. So it's much harder for the president to control what the press is doing, although easier for a president to reach the public directly through their own social media channels. But where I think we're really in the most danger, Sam, is I would say in two ways. One is the degree of hostility towards a free press that we see today, certainly heightened during the Trump era, but still continuing, especially among some circles in the Republican Party, but also among people on the left and Democrats as well. This great hostility towards the press, which the press should be checked, the press should be criticized, but the fundamental role of a press in a democracy should not be ignored. And we see what happens in dictatorships is the first thing they try to do is clamp down on the media, clamp down on journalism. And we're in a real danger point, I think, in terms of the media outlets that do try to present verified factual information are ignored because of that hostility. And the people who scream the loudest and exaggerate the most and trade in the biggest conspiracy theories are the ones who are getting the clicks and the likes and are spreading a lot of dangerous information. I think that's one thing. The other big danger, and we can talk in more detail about it if you want, is the decline in local news. We've got more than 1,000 communities now that have no local news outlet. And this is the bread and butter of people's daily existence. What their local taxes are their streets getting paved? What's going on with police and fire and so forth? And a lot of studies show that corruption increases when there's not local news coverage. Taxes increase when there's not good local news coverage, and the perspective of communities around the country, I think, is lost, and we tend to also end up with the the big media in Washington, the big media in New York, presenting their perspective on things, and we're losing the perspective of what's going on in towns across America as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge thing, and I think it's warrants. It's probably its own show, frankly, the demise of the local. But let me ask you this, just in terms of like that first part that you said, you know, like the tremendous amount of sources of information, much of which is inaccurate, sometimes purposely so, and sometimes not. The Biden administration tried to, and they just, as of today, abandoned, it appears, to create some, it's really unclear to me what it is. I mean, frankly, and I've tried to read about what it is, but I'm trying to think of what they specifically called. It was a board created in the DHS, the Disinformation Governance Board. And the board, according to them, was created to study best practices in combating the harmful effects of disinformation and to help DHS counter viral lies and propaganda that could threaten domestic security. I don't know what that means. I mean, I know what all the words mean, and I can take little phrases and understand, but like, I don't, like, study best practices in combating, like, what are they actually going to do? It was unclear, I think. And there was a lot of pushback. A lot of it was, you know, sort of, I think, bad faith pushback. But on the other hand, I don't read this and feel good about it. Like, that this board is going to do something good. Talk to us to the extent that you know about that board, and like, you know, what your sense is. If that is not the solution, what is the solution?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It was hard to understand what the board was going to do and exactly what problem it was trying to address. And I think the intent of creating the board might have been a good idea, and there's certainly a strong need for it. But I think the Biden administration didn't do the groundwork necessary to explain why it was creating the board, just exactly what the problem the board was going to address was, and really making a case to the public about why it was needed before the blowback started. Because as we all know, there's a huge problem with disinformation. Example, in April 2020, the early days of COVID, the Facebook post from the top 10 health sites was 70 million. And the Facebook post got 70 million views. The Facebook post from the top 10 conspiracy COVID sites got 300 million views, more than 4 times as much. So there's a real danger from disinformation, and that disinformation kind of played out through the COVID crisis. I think trying to do it through a government agency may not be the right way to do it. I think there could be changes in what's known as Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act. You're probably familiar with that, where the social media tech companies have no liability for disinformation that they spread, no liability if they are spreading libelous information. In the same way, any newspaper that's publishing something that's libelous faces a lawsuit for it. Any broadcast station faces a lawsuit for that. But the social media companies at this point bear no responsibility for that in terms of the law. I think that's something that could be tightened if the social media companies don't do it themselves, which I think would probably be the best ways if they took it upon themselves to really seriously take on disinformation. But if they don't, Congress could certainly act and do it that way.
Yeah, I frankly am for a tightening of 230. I think you can do that by basically saying, you know, if you have this many impressions per month or per year, you have a higher level of responsibility. I mean, frankly, you know, like, I'm not going to, I don't think it's, you know, reasonable for, you know, us to manage the comments, you know, at the Majority Report site, frankly. But I think when you start talking about 30 million views or, you know, 300 million views, you have a different level of responsibility,
right,
I think, for these things.
And a lot of it, Sam, is also being transparent about what their algorithms do, because as we've learned from some of the leaks from Facebook, is the algorithms were programmed to reward the most controversial things, the most disingenuous things, and that got us partly to where we are today. The European Union has passed things to force Google and Facebook and others to be more transparent about exactly what their algorithms are rewarding. And I think that would be another way to get at it, is if they're not more transparent, tighten that Section 230.
I'm completely down with that. The book is Clash: Presidents in the Press in Times of Crisis by Jon Marshall. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Much appreciated for your time today.
Sam and Emma, thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Alex Speidel, organizer for the United Paizo Workers. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Alex Speidel, organizer for the United Paizo Workers. Alex, what is Paizo?
Yeah, absolutely. So Paizo is the publisher of the Pathfinder and Starfinder tabletop role-playing games. So we produce a bunch of books a year that tell you how to play our fantasy role-playing game and our science fantasy role-playing game.
So it's like Dungeons and Dragons a little bit.
It is similar to the world's oldest RPG, yes, although our marketing people don't like us to say that too loud.
I was going to say, I don't mean to offend anybody. I knew as those words were coming out of my mouth that they could be really, really sensitive.
That your foot could be in it.
Exactly. All right. So
you sit down, you roll dice, you have minis, you fight dragons and werewolves and whatever else, yes.
Okay, so I mean, give us a sense of the number of employees who are workers who are working on this, and the number of dollars that are being generated. Like, how big of a business, how big of a cohort of workers are we talking about, and what are the implications beyond Paizo?
Yeah, absolutely. So Paizo is we hover around basically the second largest role-playing producer in the industry, but the gap between us and number one is much bigger than the gap between number two and number three. But we have about 75 people at the company. That's everyone from the company president down to the customer service representatives and the warehouse workers. And there are about 50 of us that are represented by the United Paizo Workers, which is our bargaining unit that unionized last fall. And
what implications is it going to have for this industry? Like, how specific is this industry? Does it include all games, or just like sort of like IRL role-playing games?
Yeah, so we are, and I have to be very specific about this now that I have the information, but we are the first unionized tabletop role-playing game company in North America, which sounds very specific, of course. But, the tabletop industry generally is, I'm sure, at least $1 billion industry. It's role-playing games, it's board games, it's card games, board game cafes, all these sorts of things. And what we're seeing is that our successful unionization drive has inspired people not only within the tabletop industry, but also in the video game industry. Right. We worked with Code CWA, the Campaign to Organize Digital Employees, with the Communication Workers of America, because they were working with other video game companies, and so they sort of understood the broader games industry, the kind of struggles and weirdnesses that we have. But having this successful win of we're a game company that unionized, you can too, has galvanized, like I say, the tabletop industry, but also other electronic games industries outside of it. So I think it's a huge turning point to have a successful games company unionized, to show that it is possible and that we can do it.
Can you talk a little bit more about the gaming industry as a whole? Because I think I don't game. I don't really know a ton about it, like personally, but just working in news, I feel like every few months there's a story that comes out about like unethical business practices about people at the top. So can you give us just like a larger, 30,000 foot up sense of the gaming industry and just some of the practices as a whole from bosses?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I've gotten to do being part of Code CWA is talk to the organizers at companies like Activision Blizzard, at Ubisoft, at these different companies that are also working on unionizing. Really, and it's interesting talking to them because, we're a tabletop game industry. We produce print books, but a lot of the issues are the same, right? The workers are, the companies make a ton of money, just piles and piles of money, but it doesn't come down to those workers who are producing the games. Crunch is a huge problem in the games industry where people have to work 60, 70, 80, 90-hour weeks to get things out for deadlines that they did not have a hand in setting. Like you say, there's stories every few months about these ultra powerful CEOs, harassing workers, mistreating workers, doing literal crimes. And nowadays, of course, trying to union bust those workers who are trying to unionize and have a say in how their workplaces are run, because that's the story that I keep hearing from the game industry workers that I talk to is we love what we do, right? Making games is kind of a dream job. We just want to have a say in our working conditions and how we're paid and how we're treated so that we can continue to make some really awesome games.
I was going to ask, like, what are the primary issues that led you to say we need to organize? I mean, are you guys working together? Well, let me ask you that question second. Let me just
that's what a union is, yes.
Well, no, but I want to ask that question. I mean, just in terms of like the physical proximity and
Sure.
how easy it was to organize. But let me just, in terms of the catalysts, was it money, or was it just this notion of like we have no, like that when you say like all of a sudden we're going to work 90 hours a week because those guys at the top randomly decided May 28th this is going to roll out, so guys, we got to be ready.
Yeah, so there were a couple of things for us. Like I say, a lot of us, when we came to work for Paizo, we accepted kind of the idea that we weren't going to be paid very well. We were going to have to put up with some stuff because making games is a dream job. But there were a couple of flashpoints last fall. The first thing was, we've been working remotely for 2 years because of the ongoing global pandemic. And once the vaccines started rolling out, management started to push for us to come back into the office. And, I knew that myself and a lot of my coworkers weren't comfortable doing that yet. Things were still spiking. It was still not really safe. But it didn't feel like management was hearing us when we were saying we weren't comfortable doing that. But then the real flashpoint for us was last fall. A longtime coworker of ours had a decade at the company, stellar job performance, was fired out of the blue. And so for us, that was sort of the moment of, we have to protect ourselves. We have to work together, because if that could happen to her, sort of none of the rest of us are safe. And so that
what was the
coupled with
theory as to why they did that?
I mean, it's difficult to say, and I certainly don't want to speculate on why someone was fired. Had I been in that position, I wouldn't want that. But she was very vocal about not wanting to bring her team back. So maybe it was that, maybe there were other reasons, but it was certainly a blow to all of us to lose a beloved coworker like that. And like I said, we just sort of realized, oh geez, we got to protect ourselves. So that's what inspired us to speedrun the unionization process, quite honestly.
So, okay. So, and you started the organizing while everyone was remote.
Yes.
How long had you been working with these other workers? And had you developed personal relationships with them? Like how hard was it to organize in a situation where you were remote, or was it in some ways easier because maybe management didn't realize what you were up to?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly pros and cons. I'd been at the company about 2 years when we started to organize. So while it was something I'd been doing research on sort of how to unionize for a while, ever since management started saying we're going to start bringing you into the office, but I didn't feel like I had the personal connections with people, because that's what unionizing is it's working with your coworkers, and I wasn't sure if I could rely on those bonds just yet. But sort of, when all the stuff went down, there was kind of a social media firestorm afterwards. It really led to us reaching out to each other and just having some really honest conversations, not even about unionizing at first, just about how's it going? How are you doing? How's work going right now? Because like I'm dealing with some stuff. And it was those kind of conversations with each other that really helped us build those bonds, that it was like, oh, we can do this. Like we're all on board and we want to do this. So it was tricky because we were remote, but you know, it's a very close-knit company. We all have contact info for each other. We're all on Discord together. And so it wasn't too difficult to find ways to talk to people, but it did definitely present an additional challenge in terms of, you know, 2 years of isolation from the pandemic definitely makes it a lot harder to reach out and have those connections.
Did you guys like set up a alt Discord for this type of stuff? I mean, I would imagine like, I mean, I don't want to get too, you know, sort of, you know, Mission Impossibly, but I would imagine there is some like, you know, operational security that you got to go through when you're starting to organize, because you don't, if you're using the company Discord, you know, you don't want management to jump on there and go, hey, what's going on here?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, we set up Discord servers. We were using Signal chats. We were very careful to only contact people on personal accounts for these things. You know, I have 2 Discords. I have a work and I have a personal one, and I made sure that union stuff never touched my work Discord at all, just in case. You know, so yeah, it was very much, you know, we were doing a lot of OPSEC, making sure that people wouldn't get wind before we were ready to do so.
So you were one of, I think, maybe half a dozen organizers who went to the White House. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago?
I'm seeing you here standing next to Kamala Harris and Chris Small. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That was wild. It was, let me look at my calendar. Was it only last week? I think it was a week from tomorrow.
Wait a second. Yeah. Where do you keep your calendar?
I have a big calendar right up here for all my conventions.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that. You like looking at the calendar. I'm
Somebody
like,
put mirrors on the ceiling. We should put calendars on the ceiling. Sorry, that was inappropriate.
All right, so give us a sense of what, I mean, like what was the implications of that? I mean, aside from the fact that you got to go and, you know, check out the White House, like in terms of like your organizing and sort of the broader unionization movement, particularly within the context of gaming, because that's where, what was the value of that? Was there any?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, personally, obviously there was value to it, but I think that the president and the vice president inviting these grassroots organizers, right? You know, it was not the people who run these major organizations. It was those of us who are doing the work. You know, to me, it shows that they're interested in helping us succeed. Everything that they said to us in that meeting was, you know, very much they wanted to hear our stories. They wanted to hear about how they can make unionizing easier. And I think it's a real show of support from this administration that, you know, has told us many times in the meetings, has said very publicly that they're the most pro-union administration in history. I don't have the historical knowledge to back that up, but I think, you know, having that symbol of they're willing to invite these grassroots organizers to the White House very publicly like this, I mean, that's huge for us. That's huge for the movement. It shows that we're not alone in this. It's not just us and our coworkers out there, that we have the support of, you know, that huge machinery. I think it's fantastic. There's tons of value there.
Was there any material implications to, let's say, the National Labor Relations Board? You know, the General Counsel has gotten a lot of like a claim for changing some rules that were very helpful for the Amazon union. Was there any of that? Is there any sort of like stuff from an administrative standpoint that made your organizing easier or more possible?
You know, I mean, I think that any sort of positive pro-worker change like that, stuff like, you know, increasing funding to the NLRB, making sure that the NLRB is pushing back against these huge mega corporations with billions of dollars that they would rather spend on expensive union busters than, you know, raising wages of warehouse workers. Anything like that helps us. You know, we are very lucky in that we were voluntarily recognized by our management. So we are in the process of negotiating our contract now. But all of these changes are going to help the people that we're working with now in these companies that are just coming up with their unionization efforts now. So all of these material changes and even more are going to be more useful. You know, there's so much more that can be done to help the movement.
When you were at the White House, did you are you like trading organizing stories with some of those other organizers?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And are you now like are you reaching out to, or are people reaching out to you for, I'm trying to organize this shop or that shop, or, I mean, how much are you extrapolating on what your experience was in terms of the broader union movement?
Yeah, I mean, we were absolutely, we were in a holding tank for about an hour before the meeting, right? So we were, talking to each other and sharing those stories and hearing a lot of the same things, even, what Starbucks workers and the library workers are dealing with rings true for a lot of us in the industry. But yeah, one of the things that I've been doing, that I've been kind of trying to ensure that the United Paizo workers do, is have this model and be very open to people to say, if you're interested in, if you're in the game industry, you want to know, how to get involved with the unionization effort, how to get involved with the CWA, reach out to us. Our email's available, our Twitter is available. I've been making these contacts with other members of the Code CWA campaign at these other game industry companies, at these other tech companies even. So yeah, it's having that symbol, have it showing that, hey, there was someone from the CWA in the White House next to Vice President Harris and the president and Chris Smalls from Amazon. I think that's huge for us, and I certainly hope that it will lead to more people reaching out to us, reaching out to the CWA, saying, hey, I want to organize my workplace. How do I start that?
Well, we will put your information. We're not going to dox you, but we will put we'll put your information on majority.fm and also in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Lastly, what are you doing about this whole ethics in gaming journalism?
There's a complicated, I think there's plenty of ethics in gaming journalism.
I'm joking. That is a.
Oh boy.
That is a.
You're trying to get me in trouble on the internet.
No, that is a long-standing joke. Alex, it was great talking to you. Congratulations on the win. And is your union starting to organize any other shops, or is that something? I mean, you want to stay. I have
no comment on what other companies I may or may not have had contact with.
Oh,
I like to hear that. All right, well, Alex Speidel, organizer for the United Paizo Workers, thanks so much for your time today. Again, we'll put that information out there if people have questions on how to organize their workplace, particularly within that industry. Hopefully, they'll reach out. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right, folks. It is that time. I couldn't help with the gaming, with the journalism. I just couldn't help.
Yeah, well,
couldn't help
I was getting a little loose myself, so.
All right, folks. We will head into the fun half. The number 646-257-3920. Just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. When you become a member, you not only get the first half of the show commercial-free, but you also have access to the fun half of the program after it's live. Also, you're basically keeping the show alive and allowing us to both survive and thrive between sort of secular changes with YouTube. Somewhere in January, we had less ad revenue. I mean, part of that is just sort of the nature of the political cycle. We had a snafu with our advertising broker who switched to a different type of advertising. And I started to realize somewhere around February, they haven't been selling our show except for to existing clients for 6 months. And so it is your memberships that make this show possible. Again, if you want access to the fun half, but do not have the financial resources to do so, send us an email, put fun half in the subject line. We will work it out for you. I've got a bunch of people who sent in some stuff about a week and a half ago. We're going to get to them in the next day or two. So give us a little bit of time. We're always behind on these things, but no one will be locked out for financial reasons. So if you are under any type of financial stress, send us an email. We will always work something out for you. We will never lock anyone out for money reasons. I may lock some people out because I just don't like you, or something. But
or you do something annoying.
You do something annoying or something like that. I mean, sometimes we try and maintain a certain exclusivity, but we will never lock anybody out for financial reasons. But again, if you're one of those people who are in a position to afford the show and you enjoy it, join themajorityreport.com. Also, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Oh, members, we are working on the cut of the live show from Boston. You will get it. You may get it exclusively as a full show, members.
Whoa.
Maybe someday we'll release it, but we'll release clips. And also, on top of the great job that everybody here did, Matt, Bradley, Emma, and our guests, Ted Leo, and Combat Zone, the band, Al Franken, Natalie Shore. We had 2 activists from Extinction Rebellion. I also neglected to thank, particularly at the time, my sister Julie, who works on the show and handles like events like that. She did a great job.
She's the best. Julie's the best.
That is amazing.
I would have lost my marbles more than I normally do, was it not for Julie. So thank you, Julie, as well. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Lekian media universe?
Yeah, tonight we got Asal Rad, the research director of the National Iranian American Council, to talk about the Iran deal and Middle Eastern politics.
Wait, who is it?
Asal Rad. She's on Twitter, ASSALRAD.
Okay.
Really good on Twitter.
So would you say that the person who ripped up the Iran deal and decided to do away with it is anti-war or pro-war?
I would say he is pro-war. I'd say that's a pretty big... we talk about that, looking back on the achievement of the Iran deal initially and what that actually signified as a moment of genuine possibility for diplomacy, and then ripping that up immediately. I would not put the person who did that as a pro-peace person.
All right, yeah, just making sure.
The Iran deal by Obama was probably his most important and greatest foreign policy success, without a doubt. I mean, I think even the supposed wind down of the Iraq War, I think was nominal in some way, and
but this was the example of you can go talk to those people that that people are portraying as just enemy and not trustworthy, and you can do a deal with them. And guess who was the untrustworthy one? It was us.
It was us.
Yep. All right. Quick break. 646-257-3920 is the number. We are going to the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomiki.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello? Is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound.
Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go smell it.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-3501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400. $1,900.
654 $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
Call it satire. Sam goes to satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just every day, all day, everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.